The morning in Willow Creek had a certain hush to it, as if the town itself were holding its breath. A thin veil of fog blanketed the cracked sidewalks, and dew clung to every blade of grass like tiny, silent tears. The street lamps, still flickering, with the last traces of the night's duty, cast long shadows that crept slowly across the pavement, and at the corner of Maple Avenue, beside a patch of worn grass and a stretch of dull gray asphalt, sat a figure so still, so heartbreakingly still, it almost didn't seem alive. It was a dog, matted, muddy, with fur that had once been tan, but now bore the weight of weather, dirt, and grief. His ribs showed faintly beneath the scruff, and a faint limp haunted his left hind leg. He wasn't injured enough to be unable to move, but somehow, something far deeper was holding him in place. His head drooped slightly, yet his eyes never left the patch of road before him, the space where, just 3 nights ago, everything had changed. To anyone walking by, it might have looked like just another stray claiming a corner of the city. But to the few who stopped to look, to the hearts sensitive enough to see what eyes alone couldn't, there was something different, something sacred, a sense of waiting, of mourning. The dog didn't bark, didn't flinch, didn't respond to calls. He wasn't guarding. He was grieving. It was Clara, the elderly woman who ran the corner flower shop, who noticed first. Her hands were full of sunflowers that morning, their bright yellow faces in stark contrast to the gloom settling in her chest as she passed the dog. She had seen him there the day before, and the day before that, always in the same spot, unmoving, watching. That morning, compelled by something she couldn't explain, Clara returned with a bowl of water and a torn sandwich from her own lunch. She approached gently, murmuring soft nothings the way one would approach a wounded child. The dog didn't growl, didn't retreat. He simply acknowledged her presence with a blink, then turned his gaze back to the road. The spot he was fixed on was oddly stained, just a faint shadow in the asphalt, slightly darker than the rest. Nearby, the remnants of orange chalk remained, markings the police had made, probably the night of the accident. Clara's heart dropped as her eyes followed the evidence. A few tufts of fur still clung to the edge of the curb. The flowers she placed on the roadside the night of the incident had wilted already, unnoticed and untouched. The memory came back in sharp clarity. 3 nights ago, sirens piercing the silence, flashing lights staining the trees. She remembered hearing someone shout that a dog had been hit by a speeding car, that the driver never stopped, that there was another dog, howling and nudging the lifeless body, refusing to leave. That dog was now here, waiting for a friend who would never come back. Clara kneeled beside the mutt, tears welling up behind her aged eyes. "You're still waiting for him, aren't you, sweet boy?" she whispered. "I saw you that night. I remember." She reached out, hand trembling, and brushed the top of his head. His fur was cold and damp. He didn't move away. He didn't lean in either. It was as if he had no more energy left to offer emotion, as if he had given it all to something, or someone, he had lost. His name, she would later learn from whispers, around town was Shadow. He and his companion, a smaller, golden-colored mutt named Dusty, had been a familiar sight to many. In a town like Willow Creek, you notice things, especially when they came in pairs. They had been stray dogs for years, but no one had ever reported them as nuisances. In fact, quite the opposite. They had their roots, their favorite porches, and even a few families who left out leftovers or old blankets. Dusty was the bold one, tail always wagging, tongue always lolling out in joy. Shadow followed quietly, always a step behind, loyal to the very end. And now that Dusty was gone, Shadow wasn't just mourning. He was anchored to that place, as if his paws had taken root in the soil of loss and no force on earth could move him. The next day, Clara brought more than just food. She came with an old cushion from her living room and a makeshift shelter, an upside-down crate lined with flannel shirts, and her late husband's military blanket. She placed it beside Shadow, gently nudging it closer, hoping he'd find some comfort. He didn't move, but she left it there anyway. Soon, other townspeople noticed. Someone posted a photo on Facebook with the caption, "This dog hasn't left the spot where his best friend died. Loyalty like this deserves the world." The post spread like wildfire, pulling heartstrings far beyond Willow Creek. People came to see him, some crying, some bringing food, others just sitting beside him in quiet solidarity. Children began calling him Ghost, believing he was guarding Dusty's spirit. A little boy, maybe 8 or 9, walked up one afternoon and left a handwritten note tucked under the food bowl. In crooked letters it read, "I lost my best friend too. It gets better, I promise." But Shadow, Ghost, was unmoved. His sorrow had become part of the landscape. Rain came and went. So did the sun. Days blurred into nights, yet Shadow remained. Not out of stubbornness, not even out of hope, but out of love. A kind of love so fierce, so unbreakable, that even death hadn't shattered it. By the 7th day, Clara began to worry. Shadow wasn't eating much. His eyes had grown even dimmer, his posture slumping further into defeat. She called a local vet and asked if someone could come check on him, gently, without forcing him away. "He's not ready to leave," she said. "Not yet, but I don't think he can hold on much longer." And deep inside, she feared what might happen if they tried to move him too soon. Because when a heart is that broken, you don't rush it. You don't pull it away from the only place it still feels connected to what it lost. You sit with it. You stay near. You wait. Just like Shadow was waiting. For Dusty. For something that his heart still hoped might return, even if it never could. The sun broke through the clouds with a reluctant warmth the next morning, casting long streaks of gold onto the quiet streets of Willow Creek. The usual hum of the town, early delivery trucks, the bakery's back door clang, and distant mourning, radio drifting from kitchen windows, was somehow dulled near the corner of Maple Avenue, as if everyone had collectively agreed to tread gently around the patch of pavement where grief had found a home. Shadow was still there. Curled against the milk crate shelter Clara had built for him, his eyes were open but unfocused, staring toward the road as if still expecting Dusty's golden form to come bounding back into sight. He hadn't touched the chicken Clara had left the night before. The cushion beneath him was soaked through from last evening's rain, yet he hadn't moved an inch. To understand Shadow's stillness was to understand their bond. Shadow and Dusty hadn't always been alone. 5 years ago, they had belonged to someone, an elderly man named Carl who lived in a small blue house at the edge of town. Carl had taken in the 2 strays when they were barely more than pups, feeding them scraps and letting them sleep on his porch. Dusty had been full of energy from the start, always darting around with a tennis ball in his mouth, while Shadow was the quieter of the 2, more cautious and careful, rarely letting anyone but Carl touch him. They had been inseparable. When Carl passed away, there was no family to take them in. Animal control came by, but they were never able to catch the 2 dogs. They simply vanished for a few days, then slowly re-emerged in the places they used to walk with Carl. They returned to the porch every now and then, even after the house was boarded up. It was as though they believed he might come back, if not for them, then for the memory. But eventually, they let the world in again, building a routine around kindness and familiarity. Clara left out food. The baker's son would toss them bits of croissant. The mailman always greeted them with a pat. They became local legends, moving as one. Shadow followed Dusty, always. And now, with Dusty gone, Shadow seemed to be unraveling thread by thread. On the 2nd day since the Facebook post went viral, a man named Ben drove from 2 towns over. He was a retired firefighter, his eyes weathered by loss and smoke, and he'd brought with him a blanket that once belonged to his own late dog, Sophie. He sat quietly beside Shadow, laying the blanket down in the grass. "I lost my girl too, years ago," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Sometimes I still wait to hear her pause in the hallway." Shadow didn't move, but his ears flicked at the sound of Ben's voice just once. People began calling him the mourning dog, and stories poured in. of pets who waited at train stations, at doorsteps, beside graves. There was something universal about Shadow's sorrow, something that reached deep into the human soul. Because in him they didn't just see a dog, they saw devotion that death hadn't silenced. Later that afternoon, a young woman named Jenna knelt beside Shadow, with her daughter Sophie, no older than 5. They brought a bouquet of daisies and a small framed photo of their own golden retriever, Max, who had passed 6 months earlier. Sophie held the photo out, showing it to Shadow. "He's in the stars now," she said softly. "Maybe your friend is too." Tears welled in Jenna's eyes as Shadow leaned, just slightly, toward her daughter's tiny hand. It was the first time he had shown even the faintest sign of engagement since Dusty's death. Just a brush of nose against fingers. But it was enough to make Jenna cry. That night, a storm was forecast to roll in. Heavy winds, cold rain, possibly thunder. Clara paced in her kitchen, unsure of what to do. She had tried coaxing Shadow into the back of her van with treats and gentle calls, but he wouldn't budge. Each time she tried to lure him even a foot away from the spot, he would whine, low, mournful, full of fear and protest. It was as if he believed leaving meant abandoning Dusty all over again. So she decided to stay. Clara packed an overnight bag, brought a thermos of tea, and set up a folding chair beside the crate. She placed a tarp over the shelter, added extra blankets, and laid another dry cushion inside. Then she simply sat beside him through the rain. As night fell, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind howled through the narrow alleyways. But Shadow didn't flinch. He sat under the tarp, eyes wide open, facing the road. Clara sat beside him in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't sure if it was the rain or emotion that soaked her, but she didn't care. He was your world, wasn't he? She whispered in the dark. And now this spot. It's the only piece of him you have left. Shadow slowly laid his head on his paws, a soft whimper escaping his throat. Clara reached out and gently stroked behind his ears. "It's okay, boy. You're not alone. I'm here." The wind howled louder, but her voice, gentle, warm, unwavering, seemed to wrap around him like a protective blanket. The old dog's breathing finally slowed, and for the first time since the accident, he closed his eyes. Clara didn't leave his side that night. In the morning, when the storm cleared and the sun broke through again, there was something different in the air. Shadow hadn't moved from his position, but his eyes were clearer. He drank the water left for him. He even took a few bites from the bowl. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small boy walking to school with his father pointed and smiled. "Look, Dad, the dog's eating again," hope bloomed, but the sadness hadn't left. It never would, not completely. Because Dusty was more than a friend. He was Shadow's compass, his joy, his reason for trusting the world. And now, all Shadow had was this spot, and the people who were beginning to understand what it meant to truly wait for someone you love even after they're gone. The morning sun rose with a softness that gently peeled back the chill of the night, and Willow Creek slowly came back to life. But in that one sacred corner, Maple Avenue near the crosswalk where Dusty took his final breath, time still moved, differently. That patch of pavement had become more than just a street. It had become a shrine, a symbol, a wound that breathed. Shadow still remained rooted to it. For many dogs, grief passes in waves and is softened by distraction, by food, by new smells, or comforting voices. But for Shadow, there was no such comfort. It was as if leaving that spot would betray the very memory of Dusty. It was where he had last seen him, where his scent still lingered in the cracks of the curb, in the faint trace of fur the wind hadn't yet taken. It was where Dusty had wagged his tail at him before that final, tragic moment. Each day, more people began to visit. What had started with Clara and Ben was now a steady stream of quiet visitors, mothers with children, teenagers with skateboards, tucked under their arms, elderly couples leaning into each other's arms. They didn't come for entertainment. They came because they saw something in Shadow's eyes that they couldn't explain. Clara noticed it too. Every morning she brought fresh water and breakfast, sometimes scrambled eggs, sometimes boiled, chicken, sometimes a handful of soft biscuits soaked in broth. And while Shadow didn't eat much, he started to accept her presence. He'd raise his head when she approached. His tail, once limp, began to twitch just slightly when she knelt beside him. It was fragile progress, like a flower pushing through the cracks of frozen ground. That morning, Clara brought something different. In her hands was a framed photo, one that she'd found on the local community page. It showed Dusty and Shadow lying in a field of clover outside the old train station, tongues out, smiling as only dogs can. She placed the frame gently against the base of the lamppost where Shadow now kept watch. Around it, small offerings had begun to gather. Handwritten notes, dog toys, collars, candles, and even a single pair of children's shoes with a drawing of Dusty scrawled in blue marker across the toe. "Look at this," Clara whispered, crouching beside Shadow. "All these people, they see you. They feel you." Shadow's eyes flicked to the photo for a moment. He didn't move closer, but a small shuddering breath escaped him, and Clara could swear she saw a tear rim his dark eyes. Later that day, a news van arrived. The story of the loyal mourning dog had reached the local TV station, and a young reporter named Elise came to cover it. She didn't shove a camera in Shadow's face. She didn't ask Clara for a dramatic interview. Instead, she sat cross-legged across the street and simply observed. Her cameraman, Mark, zoomed in slowly on Shadow's weathered form. His coat was thinning, his ribs slightly visible, but his eyes were ancient, deep pools of memory and devotion. Elise whispered, "He looks like he's guarding a piece of his soul." They aired the segment that night under the title, "A Dog's Grief, Shadow Keeps Vigil for His Fallen Friend." The anchor barely made it through the closing line without her voice breaking. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. People didn't just visit, they stayed. Strangers brought folding chairs and sat beside the memorial. Someone brought guitar and sang soft songs. A local poet named Mina recited lines about grief, loyalty, and the hearts dogs carry. "To the world, they are just dogs," she read, voice trembling. "But to each other they are everything." A family drove in from 3 towns away with their adopted rescue, Lucky, who had survived a house fire. They placed a chew toy beside the photo of Dusty and whispered, "You're not alone, Shadow. Our boy knows what it means to lose." Children drew chalk hearts on the sidewalk. Some spelled Dusty's name. Others drew Shadow's face, curled and noble beside a ghostly image of Dusty running beside him again. But Shadow, he stayed still, watching. As evening rolled in and candles began to glow, Clara sat beside him once more. "You're building something here, you know," she whispered. "You're showing people what love really looks like, what goodbye really feels like." Shadow rested his head on her lap, just for a moment. And for that moment, Clara felt something rise in her chest, a mixture of awe and heartbreak, the same feeling she used to get watching Carl walk both dogs around the corner, laughing as Dusty tugged ahead and Shadow carefully kept pace. "I know you think if you leave this spot he'll be truly gone," Clara murmured. "But what if Dusty wouldn't want you to stay here forever? What if he's waiting for you to take one more walk? Just one more." Her words drifted in the wind, but Shadow didn't stir. That night the town held a candlelight vigil, not for a person but for a bond. Dozens of people came. They lit candles around the lamppost, sang softly, and stood in silence. Children released paper lanterns into the sky, each carrying a small note tied to its base. "Run free, Dusty. Shadow still loves you. Wait for him at the bridge." Clara, wiping tears from her cheeks, gently laid her hand over Shadow's back. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. "Take all the time you need." As the lanterns floated higher, Shadow lifted his head and watched them disappear into the stars. And for the first time since Dusty died, he let out a sound. Not a whine, not a bark. It was a low, mournful howl. One long note of heartbreak that carried through the town and into every heart that had gathered there. The sound made people cry openly. Even the strongest among them wept, not just for Shadow, but for every soul they had ever lost. For the pets who passed too soon, the friends who vanished, the siblings never returned, and the holes grief carved into each of them. The spot had become more than sacred. It had become a mirror, a reflection of all the love we're afraid to lose. The days following the candlelight vigil blurred together like the fading embers of a fire not quite ready to go out. Maple Avenue remained quiet most mornings, but there was always someone there. Someone sitting, watching, waiting. Not for a spectacle, but for a sign. A sign that Shadow was healing, or at least willing to try. But Shadow, ever loyal, still refused to leave. Clara came every morning without fail. She brought soft blankets when the spring nights grew cool, new water, bowls, and sometimes even her folding lawn chair just to sit beside him. She didn't push him. She never tried to tug at him with a leash. She just sat and talked to him, about her memories with Dusty, about Carl's laugh, about how lonely the house had become since it lost the sound of 4 paws running down the hallway. And always, Shadow listened. Sometimes with his head down, sometimes with his ears twitching at the mention of Dusty's name. Sometimes, Clara thought, she saw something glisten in those tired eyes. Not just sorrow, but something else. A longing. One rainy afternoon, Clara made a decision. She placed an old blue-collar Dusty's next to the framed photo by the post. It wasn't a collar anymore, it was a memory. It smelled of sunshine and grass and the warmth of shared naps. Clara bent low and whispered, "He wore it every day. I thought maybe you could too. When you're ready." Shadow didn't move. That evening, a stranger arrived. She was young, maybe early 20s, with a quiet demeanor and gentle eyes. Her name was Lila, and in her arms she held a blind golden retriever named Maple. They had driven across the state after seeing Shadow's story online. Lila knelt beside him, silent at first, letting Maple sniff the air, then the ground, and finally Shadow himself. Maple didn't see the grief, but she felt it, and Shadow, perhaps sensing that Maple was damaged in her own way, didn't pull away. He let her lay next to him. Their bodies didn't touch, but the space between them was filled with something unspoken. A shared understanding that sometimes when pain is too great to voice, presence is the only language that matters. Lila watched, amazed. "She's never done this before," she murmured. "She's usually terrified of other dogs. But something about him, it's like she knows." Clara stood off to the side, her heart quietly breaking open. "He's still waiting for his friend," she said softly. "But maybe he's beginning to understand the world hasn't forgotten him." That night, for the first time, Shadow didn't curl up beside the lamppost. He lay beside Maple. It was small, a fraction of change, but monumental in its weight. Over the next few days, more dogs began to visit. People brought their rescues, some missing legs, some burned, some just lonely. They came not to play, but to simply be. It was like an unspoken invitation. Bring your broken hearts. Let them heal together. Shadow never barked. He never ran. But he allowed their presence. Sometimes he sniffed the air they carried. Sometimes he closed his eyes and leaned gently into the space between. And then came the day the city workers arrived. Clara stood, breath caught in her chest, as 2 men stepped out of a white utility truck with orange vests and clipboards. They didn't look cruel, but they were firm. One of them pointed at the photo, the candles, the growing collection of chew toys and plush animals. "This isn't a permanent memorial," one of them told Clara. "It's a safety concern. The city gave us notice to clear the area by next week." Clara's voice wavered. "This isn't just a pile of stuff, this is a story, this is grief." "I get it, ma'am," the man replied. "I really do. I've got a lab at home, lost my last one a year ago. But rules are rules." Shadow stood slowly watching them. He didn't growl, he didn't retreat, but he moved closer to the photo, placing himself protectively between the workers and Dusty's image, as if saying, "This is all I have left." Don't take it from me." Clara knelt beside him, tears already slipping down her cheeks. "We don't have much time, boy. They're taking it away, all of it." That night she brought something new, not food, not toys, a leash. It was frayed, old, and smelled like her late husband. Shadow had worn it once when Carl had walked both dogs through the fall leaves, their laughter echoing down the street. She set it gently beside him, and then she sat. "I can't force you," she whispered, "and I never would. But if you come with me, I promise you'll never be alone. I promise to talk about Dusty every day. I promise to leave space for his memory in our home. But I can't leave you here, Shadow. Not when they're about to take everything down." The silence stretched. The street lamp above flickered once, twice, and then, ever so slowly, Shadow looked at the leash. He didn't move toward it. He looked at Clara, and for the first time since the accident he stood, not to return to the patch of sidewalk where Dusty last lay, but to place his head gently in Clara's hand. She gasped, heart swelling. Like a tide breaking through a dam, she looped the leash around his neck, her fingers trembling, her eyes wet. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "Even if it hurts?" Shadow didn't bark, but he didn't pull away. Together they walked down Maple Avenue, past the candle stubs, past the flowers, past the photo of Dusty. Clara stopped once, turned back and whispered, "Thank you for watching over him. We'll keep him with us. Always." And as they walked, people emerged from porches and sidewalks, watching the quiet, powerful moment unfold. Some clapped, some cried, children waved. One child whispered to her mother, "He's going home now, isn't he?" And her mother replied, "Yes, he's finally going home." The house was quiet, not the uncomfortable, echoing silence of emptiness, but the kind that wraps around you gently, like a soft blanket, warm and protective. Clara opened the front door, stepping aside so Shadow could enter first. His steps were slow, deliberate. He paused just inside, his paws resting on the worn hardwood floor where Dusty's bowl used to sit. Clara had left it there, not out of forgetfulness, but out of reverence. Shadow looked at it, then at her. He didn't move toward it, didn't sniff or search. He simply lowered his head, stood still for a moment, then turned and walked into the living room where the couch stood with a familiar throw blanket, Dusty's blanket, folded neatly at the edge. Clara followed him in silence, her heart so full it ached. He was here. He had chosen to come. But that didn't mean the pain was gone. For either of them. "You don't have to forget him," she said softly, sitting in Carl's old recliner. "I never will." Shadow looked at her from across the room, then slowly laid down beside the couch, curling his body into the shape of sorrow. His tail didn't wag, but neither did it tuck. It rested, gently, peacefully, like a storm settling into calm waters. Clara turned on the radio, an old folk station that Carl used to love. The notes of an acoustic guitar filled the air, accompanied by a voice so fragile it might break. But never did. It was Dusty's favorite song, the one Carl sang to him on quiet Sunday mornings. Shadow's ears twitched, and then something changed. He let out a low, almost imperceptible whine. It wasn't a cry of distress. It was a whisper of memory, a sound pulled from the deep well of longing that sat between joy and grief. "You remember, don't you?" Clara whispered. "He used to dance to this, hop around the living room like his feet couldn't stay still." Shadow closed his eyes. That night, Clara set out 2 bowls, one for water, one for food. Shadow didn't touch them until long after she'd gone to bed. But in the morning, they were empty. And in their place, a single gray hair lay next to Dusty's old plush raccoon toy. He had carried it from the memorial. No one had seen him do it. Over the next week, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Children walked slowly past Clara's gate just to get a glimpse of the loyal dog who never gave up. Neighbors stopped by with treats, warm casseroles, and handwritten notes that said things like, "For the boy who waited," and He taught us what love really means. But Shadow didn't crave attention. He wasn't interested in walks or games or the sunny spot on the porch. He was looking. Every day around noon, he would walk to the front door, glance at Clara, and wait. She knew what he wanted. Not freedom, not escape, just one more visit. So every afternoon they drove to Maple Avenue. The candles were gone now, the flowers removed, the signpost bare. But the sidewalk still held the echoes of what once was. Shadow would sit quietly, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, staring at the exact spot where Dusty had fallen. Clara brought a small folding chair and sat beside him. They never spoke. They didn't have to. The grief had changed. Not vanished, but transformed. It no longer howled through Shadow's body like an open wound. It hummed quietly, like an old lullaby. Still there, still aching, but softened by memory. One afternoon, weeks later, something miraculous happened. Tiny white puppy, no more than 6 months old, scampered into view. She was skin and bones, her fur matted, her ribs pressing through her thin coat. She stopped when she saw them, 2 still figures beside the curb, and lowered herself to the ground, trembling. Clara gasped softly but didn't move. Shadow rose. He approached the pup slowly, head low, tail still. The puppy whimpered, unsure, ready to bolt. Then Shadow did something that made Clara's chest tighten. He lowered himself fully to the ground, just as Dusty used to do when greeting a frightened new friend. He stretched out a paw, nudging a small twig toward the puppy as if offering a peace treaty from one soul to another. The puppy sniffed, and for the first time she wagged her tail. Clara wiped her eyes. "Looks like someone needs us," she whispered. That night, the puppy came home with them. She didn't have a name, just wide eyes and a hunger that seemed bottomless. Clara bathed her, fed her, and set up a small bed next to Shadow's. But the puppy didn't sleep in it. She curled up beside Shadow, just like Dusty once did. Clara watched from the doorway, her heart caught between the pain of memory and the hope of new beginnings. She whispered into the silence, "You're not replacing him. You're just opening your heart again." Shadow didn't reply. But in the quiet, she saw something she hadn't seen in weeks. His tail moved, just once, a slow, gentle wag. Spring turned to summer, and the house slowly came alive. Laughter returned, small at first, then louder. The puppy, now named Luna, brought chaos and sunshine in equal measure. She chewed shoes, stole socks, and barked at her own reflection in the glass. Shadow didn't mind. He let her curl up beside him, let her lick his face, even shared his favorite corner of the couch. Sometimes he seemed far away, lost in thought, but he always came back, always returned. Healing, Clara realized, wasn't a straight line. It was a dance, a slow waltz between pain and joy, between holding on and letting go. One evening, Clara took a walk to the backyard. The garden had started to bloom again. Roses, daffodils, even Dusty's favorite sunflowers. She had placed a small stone plaque at the edge of the flower bed, engraved with the words, "In memory of Dusty, the friend who showed us love, never leaves." Shadow stood beside her. Luna tugged at a butterfly, and Clara smiled through her tears. "We'll never stop missing him," she whispered. "But he's here, isn't he? In you, in her, in all of us." Shadow pressed his body gently against her leg. The stars began to appear, one by one, like tiny sparks of memory lighting up the sky. And, somewhere in that quiet, sacred moment, Clara swore she felt it. A warm breeze, a rustle, a whisper. Dusty, not gone, just home. Shadow's loyalty didn't end with loss. It became a legacy of love. Dusty may be gone, but in every heartbeat, every silent vigil, and now in Luna's gentle presence, his memory lives on. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like. Share it with someone who believes in the power of a dog's love. And if you want more heartwarming stories that celebrate the bond we share with our furry companions, hit that subscribe button and join our journey. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear about the dogs who've left paw prints on your soul.